Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you that will help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today is an interview with Krista Couch. And Krista is a coach and former binge eater herself. She now helps other people break free from binge eating. And in this interview, we talk a bit about motivation, about self-acceptance, about body acceptance, and she shares her journey and how she managed to recover from binge eating. I'm going to pop her details below if you are interested in working with Krista or checking out her work or just following her on Instagram. She's creating some great content. So without further ado, let's start the interview. Hi, Krista. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
No worries at all. I think I found you on Instagram yesterday, and a lot of your content really jumped out at me, and I could see that this was something you'd struggled with as well before in the past. Mm-hmm. So I thought I would ask you to come on, and you very kindly agreed to come and share your story. So I don't know how comfortable you feel perhaps about just kicking off with telling us a little bit about your journey with binge eating. Like, how did it start and what did it look like for you?
Yeah, so I started struggling with food at a really young age. I struggled with my confidence. I was born with a birthmark on my face, and it's on my left cheek. And so I think that was something I couldn't control, but I could focus on my weight. And I had a lot of influences in my family where they're very focused on diet culture and being healthy, but a lot of that I took in as I can control my weight, I can change my weight. So from a young age, I focused a lot on calories and food. And by the time I was 12, I was very restrictive and very active. So
can I just say, when you say young age, focusing on calories, we're talking under 12?
Yes, like elementary school.
Wow, that is young. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
So I was young. So I was 12 when I started going from just like I'd overeat sometimes to I'd binge eat, and I didn't know what it was. I just thought I was broken. I thought that there was something inherently wrong with me, that nobody else is doing this. This is messed up. I'm even more fundamentally flawed. So the binge eating continued as I was very restrictive and I was hitting growth spurts and my body needed food, but I wasn't fueling it in the way that it needed. So it was getting fueled by screaming for me to eat, and that led to binges. And by the time I was about 14, I had found like a Yahoo Answers page where it talked about binge eating disorder, and I was like, this is me. Like, this is what I'm doing. So that's the first time that I like put it together, like, I'm binge eating.
Was it a relief to have a name for what was going on for you?
It was definitely. I remember crying. I remember sitting in like front of the computer and just being like, wait, this isn't just me. I'm not like the only person in the world. Because like at that age, you're like, you see your world, you see the people around you and what they do. And for me to realize that there's other human beings out there that were struggling, that means that there's also solutions, there's also help. It took me a long time to actually get to that point, but it was a relief.
So what did you do? What did you do with the information? Did you tell anybody at that time, or did you keep it to yourself?
I told my mom, and I told my mom a while after I first found it. I told her when I was about 14. And when I told her, she, of course, with a lot of love for me and her understanding of food and body and all of that, recommended some diets and actually took me to like a weight loss doctor that worked with hormones because I have had thyroid issues. So there was a lot of focus on, let's change the food and let's focus on losing weight, and that will help you. Mm-hmm. So I was about 16, and these things kind of continued. Sometimes I do pretty well, and sometimes in my mind, and then I would end up binging again. And when I was about 16, it was like the first week of summer, and I ended up purging, and it turned into bulimia. And I struggled with bulimia for a few years before, and I went to treatment several times. I did hypnotherapy, I did therapy, I met with dietitians, I did all sorts of things. I did coaching. I got all of the different kinds of help there is out there. And finally, it all kind of started clicking when I was about 19, when I was in college, and kind of realized that I wanted a future that didn't have this, and I was going to fight for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so with the treatment then, how did treatment help? Like, what were the things that really resonated you? What did you learn? What were you able to do with the support of treatment that would have been difficult to have done on your own?
Yeah, well, especially since I was struggling with bulimia by the time that I got treatment, it almost was like going to therapy was like an interruption in the time that I could binge. Like, I was so deep in it and it wasn't really my choice to go. And so even though I wanted to be done with this, there's a little part of me that was holding on really tight. And so where treatment really helped me, especially when I got I did IOP first, and then stepped up in levels of care up to residential, so I was staying at a treatment center. And what helped a lot was kind of handing over all of the food choices, handing over all of the ability to make those decisions, and just focusing on what was going on with me, and being able for the first time to just eat normally and be able to focus on fueling my body without having to make those decisions myself, because it was just too much for me. But as far as the therapy work and stuff that I was doing, I really don't think that there was much change until I really realized that there was reasons I wanted to recover, and started focusing on those reasons that I wanted to recover. And I didn't really do that until I was in residential treatment. I didn't really focus on these are the reasons that I don't want to have this. I want to have a family. I want to get married someday and have a very honest relationship where I'm not hiding food and hiding these things. And I want to live my life where I can go run and hike and enjoy those activities, and not feel like I'm gonna pass out because I've been restricting, or feel like I can't move because I'm so full, or I don't want food to hold me back from living my life. And every day I would list out those reasons, but especially when I stepped down in care and it was just me and a grocery store right there, and I had to make the decision. And I didn't always make the decision to recover, but I kept making those lists. I kept listing out the reasons I wanted to recover, and I tried to apply everything that I had learned in accumulation of years of treatment. And eventually, as I worked on so many different elements, I started to realize that I was healing, and my relationship with food was healing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned restriction a few times. For you, was restriction the main reason for the binges, do you think? Or was it other things going on? Because some people talk about binging as being almost exclusively a response to restriction. And I was just wondering what your experience of that was.
At first it was definitely a restriction. When I'm talking about the 12-year-old me who was in a growth spurt and needed fuel, it was definitely a restriction. But there became a point, and I think that this was more when I was a little bit older, where it was like, I don't know how to sit with myself without binge eating. Like, I don't know how to be with myself and just be a human and not be eating. Like, I don't know how to be still. And I think that there was a lot of anxiety and stuff that I wasn't willing to process and wasn't willing to sit with and wasn't willing to acknowledge that it was even there. And so it became a way of emotionally numbing and even a habit, and just something that, like, okay, I have this chunk of time during my day. Of course, that's going to be a binge. Like, I'd plan ahead for it. So I really struggled with all of sorts of reasons, but it definitely wasn't just restriction. I think that I gave up restriction way before I gave up binging.
Yeah. And so how did you feel in terms of because what we eat affects our bodies, right? It affects how they feel, and it can affect the size of our body as well. Like, what was your body image like? And what's been the journey with that, I suppose? Because that's a big area for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. I definitely struggled with my body image, especially when I was in high school and stuff. I think by the time, and especially like the younger I was, the worse my body image was. I think that as I started figuring out who I was, that became a little bit more important than my body image. But it affected my weight. My weight would go up and down and around, and I was constantly adjusting to new weights and constantly focused. Like, there wasn't a time when I didn't have a goal weight. Like, it never was enough. And no matter how much my weight shifted, it wasn't going to be enough. And then my weight would go up, and I just felt so out of control of that. And I was so angry that that wasn't up to me because I so desperately wanted to change it. And I think that, like, my body image, what really started to shift with that was realizing that I didn't want a life where my body mattered. Like, I want my body to be a vessel of living life and not the amount of fat molecules on my body, but the amount of life in my body, like the amount of living that I can do through my body. And that was a subtle, slow shift that did not happen overnight for me.
I think that's a really lovely way of putting it, though. You know, seeing it as our bodies, they are vessels, aren't they? They're more than what they look like, and they allow us to live. And there was a really lovely Instagram post that I saw of yours where you talked about your scar and the journey that you'd gone on with that. And you talked about rewriting your story about it. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'll pull my hair back. It sometimes falls in front a little bit, but I have this scar on my face. And when I was about 2 years old, I had surgeries on it. I was born with a birthmark, and I had about 10 surgeries when I was under 10. So I forget how many there were, but there was a lot of surgeries that I was going through. And my face was constantly an object of attention and something that set me apart. And so I hated it. I hated that I couldn't change it. I hated that it made me different. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to blend in. I was like angry at my face, and I didn't like looking at my face. I hated looking in the mirror. It was a touchy subject for me. And I tried to brush it off. I tried to live my life and pretend like it didn't bother me. And honestly, somewhere along the way, it got a little bit better, and I started hating it a little bit less. But it wasn't until I really learned about, we talked a little bit before about Brooke Castillo and the life coach school and writing the story we have about ourselves. And I was in coach certification, and one of the days was writing the story that we have about ourselves. And I wrote about my birthmark and kind of analyzed, where is this story still serving me? And at this point, I was 21, and I was in recovery. I was doing well in recovery, and I was engaged to my husband now. Like I was in a really happy place in my life, and I didn't realize that story was still holding me back so much. And I finally started we wrote our story, and then the next thing we did was write the story we want to have. I realized that there's a story that I want to tell myself about my birthmark. I want to tell myself that it makes me me. So, because it does. I wouldn't be myself without all of the emotion and all of the things that my birthmark has impacted me with. I would not be Krista. I would not be the woman I am. I would not be able to coach in the way that I can, have the empathy that I have for people. I wouldn't have had to do some work on myself that I probably wouldn't have had to do if I didn't have that scar. And I think that was the big thing, for the big shift for me, is I don't always love it. I just still look in the mirror sometimes and I'm like, meh, I could do without that. But I catch those thoughts, and I realize that story just doesn't help me. The story where that really does make me me, and I believe that. I 100% am behind this story. It makes me me. Mm-hmm. I love that it has made me the woman that I am, because I wouldn't be her without it.
So if somebody's got a story, let's say, that is really not serving them and they don't like it and they want to change their story, what would you say to that person? Where would they start?
I think that being aware is the first step, really digging into why do you have the story you have right now? What is the story? Have you even taken time to think about what story you're telling yourself about yourself? And what story do you want to tell yourself? And really comparing those two and realizing you're not going to get to the place where you believe this new story overnight. It's just not how our brains work. There's a gap there. And what really helped me, and what I would recommend, is when you notice the things that you're telling yourself in the old story that you don't want anymore, call it out. Just be wait, that's not the story that I want. That's my old story. And tell yourself something that you believe instead. So maybe you don't believe that, maybe if it was me in this story about my birthmark that I was telling myself that this makes my face isn't symmetrical and I hate that, was part of my old story. And when that came up and I'd look in the mirror and notice that come up, I'd be it's okay, that it's possible that someday I'm going to love that symmetry. And it's possible that my unsymmetrical face is beautiful. It's possible that, and just find something you can believe and just try to take the next step. But it all starts with calling it out and recognizing the story that's not helping.
Yeah, it made me think about our mutual friend Brooke Castillo, who talks about the bridging thoughts. So this idea of turn a negative story straight into a positive one is you're just not going to believe that, right? It's not realistic. So the example that I've heard her use, and you've probably heard her use it as well, is that idea if you see your body and you think, I hate my body, is to catch that and say to yourself, I have a body. Because it's more neutral and it's totally true. You can't argue with that. Whereas if you catch it and say, no, I love my body, but you don't believe it, that's just not going to work. It's not going to do anything for you, is it?
Yeah. I 100% believe I have a body. That's something that you can get behind and actually believe.
Yeah, 100%. And then because coaching is your realm as such, I'm not a coach, I'm a therapist. One of the things I'm really interested in about coaching is the idea of motivation, because I think I think of coaching as almost like a coach's job is to try and help their client get motivated. And I think with something like binge eating, when people feel like it's something they have failed at figuring out again and again, I was wondering just like what your thoughts are on motivation with someone, because actually you were very young when you recovered.
Yeah.
Like there's a long time, and you were very young when it started, so it certainly wasn't easy. But I wonder, like, if you're with someone who's been struggling for 20 years, how do you think?
And that's something that motivation is created by our brains. Our thinking and the thoughts that we have are either not motivating or motivating. And when we choose to think things that are motivating, it makes a huge difference. And that was a huge part of my recovery, was choosing to motivate myself. And that was something I learned from Brooke Castillo, is like creating my why. And there's some other things I had done in therapy, but really what clicked for me is creating a hard why. And what a hard why is creating a reason that is just above any thing that will, like, any urge or any desire to continue to binge. But you don't just like stumble upon like a hard enough why to do that. It's like something that you create every day. And that's what I discovered, is like, I'm not going to think one thought that is strong enough to keep me going in recovery. I'm going to think a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to make them such a prominent part of my life that I continue to take the next step. And what I really recommend doing, if you're in that you feel like you are just going to struggle forever, make a habit, even if it's just like 10 seconds per day, like where you pull out your phone and do a voice memo real quick and list a reason that you want to recover. The more that you're talking about and thinking about and writing about and having conversations about the reasons that you want to take the next step in the direction of recovery, the more capable you are going to become of taking that next step.
I love that. I think that's a really, really lovely idea, and it sounds really doable, that idea that you keep bringing yourself back to your reasons and cultivate it. I always think about that way of purpose. People talk about they want to find their purpose, and I always think you don't find your purpose, you create it.
Yes.
So that resonates with me there. And then finally, this is something I ask, everybody who comes on and tells their story, that, what would you say to someone else who right now is struggling with binge eating disorder, wants to figure it out, or just binge eating, whether it's eating disorder or not, wants to stop doing it, but they just don't know where to start? Like, what would you suggest that people do or consider first?
Yeah, I think the first thing to consider is your motivation. I think that you're not going to have this perfect hard why that's stronger than any reason that you want to binge again. But cultivating your motivation and finding the reasons that you want to change the way that you look at food and your relationship with food is so critically important, because it's hard. It's hard, and like, don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect yourself to have no urge to binge again. Don't expect yourself to never want to go on another diet. Don't expect yourself to never want to have disordered behaviors again. But expect yourself to show up and create motivation every day. And as you do that, and as you have that realistic expectation with yourself that, like, I'm not going to love recovery, it's not going to be easy, but it's so worth it because I have these reasons that I want to do it, and they're so powerful to me, that's like a game changer. And I really believe that anybody, no matter how long you've struggled, and if you're like, I've struggled my whole life and I'm in my 60s now, you can still find freedom. It's going to be a hard journey. It's not easy. You're going to have a lot of ups and downs and a lot of urges that feel like they're so much bigger than you, but it's possible.
Yeah. And I would kind of echo that. I've worked with people, living women in their 50s and 60s who really have changed their relationship with food. So I 100% agree that it's certainly possible. And I suppose also I'd want to add to what you just said is that, I know we chatted briefly about this, the idea like recovery is not linear. It's interesting when you said to me earlier, like, I don't know exactly what point I recovered. Like, I say exactly the same thing as well. I feel like for ages I was in this sort of semi-recovered place.
Yeah.
And it takes me back to like one of my favorite quotes, which is a Charles Dickens quote. It says that, isn't it funny how day by day nothing changes, and then when you look back everything's different. And I suppose it comes back to, again, like, even if it's that daily voice memo where you keep reminding yourself like what it is that you want, what it is that you want to change. I'm a big fan of like where you put your attention and intention as well. It's hugely helpful.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
It's
Well,
day by day.
Exactly. Well, Krista, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your story. I hope people found it helpful. I certainly found it really useful to hear what you've got to say and see how you're working. You're in the same arena and just taking a slightly different way. And I think some people, coaching really is better for some people than therapy, and other people need therapy. Like,
yeah,
it's
different, and it's you. And something I believe is that you know what's best for you. Some people, it helps to have both, and like, you know what's best for you.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, thank you very much. You take care.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
No worries at all. It's been great. Thank you, Krista.